I feel that hopefully, most people try and believe in what they think is true. Sure, there will always be the grifters, but for the most part, I think people genuinely believe in things that in their mind is factual. Then how is it then that so many people can think they are right when everyone else's opinion is so different? The war in Ukraine started at the beginning of 2022, about 2 years ago, and to watch people's opinion on it from the start to today is an interesting thing to behold. And again, this war surprised me when I assumed Ukraine would lose quite fast, and so did most people. The US asked Zelensky at the start of the war if he wanted them to evacuate him out of the capital, and he famously said, "The fight is here, I need ammunition, not a ride." Well, alright then. 350 million in February, 200 million in March, and then another 800 million later that March, and then 2 billion in April. Zelensky would get his bullets, alright. For a brief background on the circumstances of the war, you have Ukraine and Big Papa Russia. You see, Ukraine in 2014 decided to kick out this guy called Yanukovych, a pro-Russian candidate that people didn't like very much, when he did some pro-Russian stuff. In response, Russia, a foreign country, decided to invade Ukraine, taking Crimea. The reason was that Crimea was mostly Russian, and Russia was upset that they kicked out the guy they liked. You know, this kind of reminds me of something. Ukraine's reaction to this whole thing was basically to sit there and take it. With very little resistance on their part, they kind of just signed a treaty Russia would break later on. And when I say Ukraine basically just sat there and took it, that doesn't mean that Ukraine didn't try. It was just that Ukraine wasn't in the position to go up against a world superpower at the time. But this event taught them a very important lesson, and the next time this happened, they would be very, very ready for it. The world's reaction was, well, mixed.
I think it kind of sucks.
A foreign country had just invaded and taken land like it was the medieval era, and the world's reaction was sanction, and a slap on the wrist. Russia's reaction was basically, well, that was easy. Russia would continue supporting and directly organizing a rebel faction in Ukraine for a few more years, until, again, Ukraine was desperately trying to get into NATO to try and avoid what happened in 2014. And you want to know what happened when Russia figured out about this? Their reasoning for this was basically Ukraine was becoming pro-NATO. You know, the thing Ukraine could join so they wouldn't get invaded. Another reason was the denazifying of Ukraine, a statement that they would walk back on after figuring out Zelensky was actually Jewish himself and that Nazis actually had no control over Ukraine at all. No, but you don't understand. NATO was expanding aggressively, and like a trapped dog, Russia had to strike first. The US even promised Russia they wouldn't expand NATO. Well, first of all, the US didn't promise Russia anything. The only case of this happening was a one-on-one conversation between George H.W. Bush and Gorbachev, where he said he promised he wouldn't expand NATO. Was this written anywhere and signed? No. It was an informal promise from one guy to another. And even then, this claim isn't that strong anyways. Even though the US didn't promise Russia anything, they still did try not to expand NATO. They were quite anti-doing that. But do you want to know who wasn't anti-NATO? The people that desperately wanted to join. You know, the countries next to Russia. This wasn't NATO expanding, but rather independent countries wanting to join on their own accord. And why did they want to join? What was the one big thing that they were so scared of happening? Alright, even if this wasn't all true, and it is, NATO aggression against Russia, I argue, still doesn't give Russia the right to invade Ukraine. For example, what is the downside of every country on Earth being in NATO? The fact that Russia can no longer invade them? NATO is a defensive alliance. They couldn't invade Russia even if they wanted to. It's all just Russian paranoia. Classic. Using logic like this to not only defend Russia declaring an unjust war, but to also try and figure out a logical reason for why Putin did this is dangerous rhetoric. So, in 2022, Russia attacked Ukraine, and in the early days of the war, it looked like they would succeed in taking over all of it, but they were pushed back. Then they got pushed back a few more times. And then you have a failed summer offensive, some trench warfare and some very slow advances on both sides. 2 years passed, and here we are today. There was a lot of support for Ukraine when the war started. I mean, most people saw Ukraine as a fellow member of the Liberal Democratic Club. Oh wait, I'm sorry, this quote actually isn't for Ukraine, it's actually for a different country. The war between Israel and Palestine started in 2023. Wait, no, sorry. I meant to say 2021. Oh, sorry again. I meant to say 2014. No, it didn't start until 2012, 2006, 2000, 1981, 1967, 1950, 1948. Israel would have a multitude of defensive and some offensive wars, primarily against Palestine and a coalition of neighboring Arab countries. Palestine would end up losing a lot of their territory from these wars. An event such as the one on October 7th is not a surprising one looking back through history. A lot of the reason for this hostilities was the Allied powers' decision to create a place for Jews to live after the Holocaust. This location just so happened to be the place of a large Arab population, the Palestinians. After Israel declared itself an independent nation, Palestine and the coalition of Arab countries used it as an opportunity to get back at the land that they had lost. The reason for the other countries' involvement was a sense of camaraderie and, overall, helping the Arab people. However, due to Israel's sick win-to-lose ratio, they managed to establish themselves as an independent country. This was probably helped due to some generous donors. What? It was the Cold War. They were doing this kind of thing all the time. The USSR was also doing it, right? I don't want to hear it. This stack of losses filled the Palestinians' hatred for Israel, leading to Hamas taking control over the Gaza Strip. Israel responded by creating a blockade around the Gaza Strip. After years of small qualms between the two, finally, we had October 7th. As it becomes more obvious as we continue everything surrounding Israel and Palestine, it is much more gray than the other conflict, happening not too far away. I just wanted to start off by saying to make sure to keep the comment section civil. I understand I will be discussing two topics that are very upsetting to a lot of people, so I feel like it's important to remind everyone this is a silly video on the internet, and to just drink some tea and chill out. Correcting any mistakes I make in this video is not frowned upon, and I appreciate your feedback. I mean, did you just hear my brief explanation of the Israel-Palestine thing I just gave a second ago? There's at least 20 people that hated how I explained that. This graph is going to represent where a person stands on the two wars. The more left you are, the more you support Ukraine, and the more right you are indicates how much you are pro-Russian. The Y coordinates are up if you support Israel and down if you support Palestine. So basically, it's like the political compass, but figuring out where people stand on the two wars instead of their political standing. Then again, people don't really like that thing too much. Maybe I should make a video about why. Anyway, when talking to different people about these two wars, it's possible that you'll get widely varied results on each, and even more varied on their combined opinion on both wars. You might get a person that's pro-Palestine but pro-Russian, or pro-Russian but pro-Israel, or pro-Ukrainian and pro-Palestinian. You get the deal. However, I believe that overall, there is a trend for both wars that you'll see people take. If, let's say, in 100 years, a person was to look back and can contemplate who was right and who was wrong about both wars. Normally, you would assume if you were neutral with Ukraine, then you wouldn't be either pro-Russia or pro-Ukraine. But in reality, the center for Ukraine is much more in the favor of the pro-Ukraine stance. Why? Well, because due to most information we have today, it can be inferred that Ukraine is the good guy, and Russia is the bad guy. As an example, can you imagine if someone in World War II was on the fence about Nazi Germany after 1945? What actually is centrist is more favored in the pro-Ukraine direction. And so the center for Israel and Palestine would look like this. Oh, it's in the center. That's a little strange, isn't it? Well, let's just look at this for a second. In most places, saying that you are pro-Russian and that Russia is doing the right thing for attacking Ukraine would make you look insane. But for the other war, as long as you're taking a non-extremist take on it, it's much more widespread for people to have a varied opinion about it. Looking at the polling, there is a much more mismatched support for the war between Israel and Palestine than there is for Ukraine and Russia. I mean, you don't see hundreds of colleges protesting for Russia, now do you? I don't actually think that anyone can say for certainty what a person in 100 years will think of Israel and Palestine. but maybe listening to what other people have to say about the topic may help us understand the situation a little bit better. First of all, let's go over the two political parties in the US to see where they fall here. First up is the Republicans. When concerning Ukraine, it would seem that their opinions have shifted over time. At first, it's fair to say they supported Ukraine as much as Democrats did. However, over time, they have voted less and less on bills supporting Ukraine. Why? Well, one focus is that they don't want to be sending billions of dollars to a foreign country just so America can fight in some proxy war. Oh, whoops, sorry, wrong war. Anyway, I think it's fair for me to say that America isn't just giving Ukraine money, it's giving them guns, ammo, and weapons. And no, America can't just use that Ukraine funding to fix some houses. That's not how it works. It's also somewhat flip-floppy as Republicans fully support giving funding to Israel, a war that Democrats are somewhat iffy on. Democrats aren't going out and dissing on Israel or anything, but they are much more hesitant to say much of anything good.
The United States should consider rethinking our military support for Israel?
It breaks my heart because the current leadership in Israel is walking us down that path, where I don't think you have a choice but that consideration.
For Ukraine, the Democrats are very adamant about Ukraine winning the war. This opinion being echoed by Kamala Harris, saying,
"I've been proud to stand with Ukraine. I will continue to stand with Ukraine, and I will work to ensure Ukraine prevails in this war."
Now, with the baseline set for what normal people might normally fall into when it comes to this conflict, let's see where some of the most unnormal people go on the list, that being online video commentators. I wonder how strange this graph is going to look when we're done with it. 5.83 million subscribers, 6 full-length videos on Ukraine, 1 video on Israel, and over 30 million views on these topics. Mr. Harris, with his over-editing style, formulates informative documentary videos on intriguing video concepts. Alright, I'm gonna stop editing like that. When it comes to Ukraine, it's fair to say he's pretty pro-Ukraine. In each one of his videos on the topic, there are many moments of him exposing Russia's downfall in the war and giving an overall explanation of what's going on over there. He'll attack Russia for the overuse of censorship or their failed war tactic, and cover what Ukraine is trying to do to win the war. He doesn't do anything in particular other than overfocus some of the time. There's no pro-Ukraine propaganda or anything, just journalism that shows Ukraine as the good guys and Russia as the bad guys, broadly. Israel, on the other hand, his videos focus more on the history of Israel and Palestine, a more informative history kind of video. Now, even these types of videos can be used to persuade people. Then again, I feel like it's fair to say his research was accurate, and there was very little selective focus to create some kind of bias. This means it's only fair with the information we have to put him in the center of the graph for Israel and Palestine. Now, just to make sure we hear both sides of the argument, let's hear from a person who has quite the opposite opinion. It's the beanie-wearing fanatic Tim Pool. To simplify his arguments on Russia and Ukraine real quick, Tim basically just spread Russian propaganda to Western audiences. And I mean, if there's one thing Russia's good at, it's their propaganda. He will use talking points like NATO's expansion, where he will falsely claim it's NATO's fault for aggressively expanding and forcing Russia to declare war on Ukraine. Or they will focus on bad things Ukraine is doing, while keeping the bad Russian things out of light.
Ukraine is the enemy of this country. Ukraine is our enemy.
However, since he is showing this to a Western audience, a lot of his points are diluted, and he won't advocate to start helping Russia or anything. So that's why he goes around here. Now, Israel and Palestine were a different issue. As much as I hated watching through his countless talking points for why Ukraine was bad, it was hard to find much for his opinion on Israel-Palestine. For a political commentator, you can really tell where those funds were going, huh? To be honest with you, the best I can give him is a very, very slight lean for supporting Israel. He's made a few remarks here and there about supporting Israel, but he holds the belief that America shouldn't be involved in anything foreign. So, unless I miss some big clip going out there, I think it's fair to say he's slightly supporting for Israel. Now it's time to put in Tim Pool's worst enemy, a person named Jake Broe, a Ukrainian supporter with all his might.
Pull out all military support, and we should apologize to Russia.
This guy needs to go to jail.
This ex-stock YouTuber completely shifted his content to focus on the war in Ukraine. Almost to a fault, this man is the definition of a pro-Ukraine supporter. He congratulates the Ukrainians on the smallest achievements and downplays the ones from the Russians. Oh, the attacks made by the Russians? Those are slow and won't get anywhere. And if they do, then who cares? It was just a small town. This isn't to belittle him or anything, but it's very important to call someone out if they're just getting some factual information wrong. And Jake Broe never seems to point out any of the missteps Ukraine could be taking. Sure, Ukraine might be the good guys, but that doesn't mean that they're perfect. Now, it is possible his take, like most people, has changed on Israel and Palestine since October 7th, as most people, including him, were disgusted by the actions on that day. But over time, it's possible his opinion has changed. But without additional information, it's not fair for his placement to have any real meaning, meaning he gets a slight lean for Israel. For these past three, I feel like it's fair to say that they are mostly more tame when it comes to Israel and Palestine, and that's normally what you see with the conflict. It's much more complicated and confusing, and on a grand scale seems to be less important by most people. But that shouldn't overshadow the conflict, so let's see some more politically knowledgeable people when talking about the conflict. A second thought is much the opposite. He's much keener on talking about Palestine than Russia or Ukraine. Either being a good or bad thing, he will tackle the issue with a more emotional point of view. The emotional framing here is really crazy, not only in the comparison to the people I just talked about, but also the average person as a whole. He takes a much more radical opinion concerning the Israel-Palestine war. First of all, he confidently calls the war genocide.
The Palestinian people have been subjected to a brutal and genocidal occupation for 3/4 of a century,
claiming the horrible positions the Palestinians are in.
And most importantly, we are scaring the criminals enabling this genocide, whether they admit it or not.
And what he sees as an overabundance of killing of civilians, including children.
On October 7th, 2023, the Palestinian resistance took the fight to the Israeli occupation and knocked the wind out of them a little bit.
Secondly, he says it's not very complex, directing the viewer that if they were to inform themselves, they would more likely have his opinion, and overall thinks Israel, or at least the IDF, is evil. He gets a very strong support for Palestine. For Ukraine, it's more simple. He made some videos when the war happened and a few cents. Mostly, it's a mainstream opinion of it. Russia bad, not nearly as entertaining. He gets some average support for Ukraine. Andrew Tate, funny enough, is one of the first people to have a strong pro-Russian point of view. As the same with Tim Cook, he says pro-leaning Russian talking points that are either debunked or don't matter too much. NATO is aggressive, Ukraine has Nazis, so it's obvious he would be a pro-Russian, pro-Israel, somewhere around here. And let's see.
When you call it a war, you're doing a disservice to the people who are having their limbs blown off by some of the most advanced technical weaponry on the planet. It is a genocide, and it's disgusting.
One thing left out of this equation was his ethnicity. Maybe this isn't exactly why, but he has definitely phrased it this way.
I don't know what answer you expect from me, because let's forget the fact I'm a Muslim.
He's almost as pro-Palestinian as the very democratic socialist, a second thought. They both use words like genocide and harshly condemn Israel, but also the USA's influence on the region. I don't know for anyone else, but for me, this was a very surprising fact to learn about. Whatever, man, you do you. Now, hypothetically, if I were to talk about someone who I originally put in my notes that they should get off Twitter, who do you think I would be talking about? Thankfully, I don't deal with hypotheticals. Sell Your Houses to Who Ben has been a political commentator for quite a while on the internet. Ben works with a factual mindset, mainly focusing on the facts and not emotion. Or, well, that's his image of it. Ben is Jewish, so when it comes to Israel-Palestine, it's very easy to see where he stands. He does a lot of content on the war, taking a more emotional tone some of the time. Overall, he thinks Hamas is a terrorist organization that has done some terrible things, such as the attacks on October 7th. He also believes the reason for Israel's fighting is justified, but also their current way of handling it. He talks about Israel's history and how rough and unfortunate it's been for the country, and hopes for a better day. He gets a very, very strong support for Israel. He has a bit more of a subdued but still supportive liking towards Ukraine. From Ben's perspective, looking at the war as anything other than aggression from a foreign country is stupid. He disapproves that Russia has a historic claim to the region, and overall believes in Ukraine's right to fight back. However, it can be seen he has a reluctance to support Ukraine.
I don't know where every dollar is going in Ukraine. I don't know that all my questions were answered. Say, electoral problems in Ukraine or corruption problems in Ukraine.
When America could be focusing on more important things. There is also the lack of advocacy he has in comparison to his videos on Israel-Palestine. If I were to say, I would say he has some leaning support for Ukraine. Now, if you looked at Ben and wished there was a more leftist version of him, I've got your guy. Stephen Bennell, also known as Destiny, is a leftist political content creator, focusing on American politics. Most of what he learns can be found on his stream, which he does almost daily to keep up with the breaking news of what's going on, while also researching topics he finds particularly interesting. For Israel and Palestine, he makes a point to research the topic and put his findings into an accessible Google Doc. Looking at the sheer number of times he's debated this topic, it should ideally be really easy to find how Destiny feels about it. However, like another person I'm going to have to clarify for, both extremes are wrong. By understanding his actual argument, shows that he's more pro-Israel than pro-Palestine. On one side, he says the settlements aren't good, there needs to be a way for Israel to want peace, and finds criticism of how Israel's handling the war, albeit not as big as ones like the second thought would give.
Ideologically and militarily and strategically, the settlements are just a disaster that need to stop. But I understand why Israel doesn't want to stop them because they're just trying to annex the West Bank. So, yeah, I think there should be a strong opposition.
On the other side, he says Hamas is a terrorist group. Palestine also needs a reason to come to the peace table, and he mostly debates pro-Palestinian people. He gets some support for Israel. Also, for Ukraine, he gets a normal amount of support, I guess. Can you tell that these pro-Ukrainian, pro-Israel people are boring me? Very simply, he just holds a mainstream democratic position on it. Now we have another political channel from a guy named Vaush. Vaush has equally strong views on both Ukraine and Palestine, siding with them both. When the Russian-Ukraine war happened, he made a lot of not only standalone videos on it, but live streams as well. His points are obviously pro-Ukraine, congratulating Ukraine's victories and making fun of Russians' losses. He has also gone on the history of the situation, while making sure to keep up with the war as time has gone on.
The natural thing that I would expect a leftist to say is, the Azov battalion can go fuck themselves. However, the thing we need to do to prevent stuff like this from happening is to put an end to Russian imperialism. That, to me, that's just like a one-to-one thing that just makes so much sense to me.
He also put the Ukraine flag on his Twitter username. Cute. The same could be said of his opinion on the Palestinian-Israel war. Even though a year or two can cause some differences in the type of content, he made sure to cover it day one, going over the history and keeping up with the conflict. He holds a pro-Palestinian stance, with the whole genocide talking point being used here the most. He also brings up the history of the constant bullying Palestine has been subjected to. For both these topics, I feel like it's fair to say he holds the same opinion on both, giving him strong support for both sides. Okay, I hear you. Vaush? Way too far right for me. Give me some real leftist stuff. Give me social spending. Give me government control. Give me Let's just get some things out of the way before talking about Hasan.
Oh my god, Hasan! I love you!
Statements such as him being a Russian shill or being an anti-Semite are unfounded and not very productive. It's fair to criticize him for how he talked about Ukraine before the war. He said things such as,
"This idea that Russia is going to do a land invasion into Ukraine is psychotic."
A completely idiotic statement using foresight. Hasan would make multiple similar statements up until the invasion of Ukraine.
It was just about the start, dude. It was gonna be like next week, or it was gonna be the week after. I promise, dude. It was definitely gonna happen. You know what I mean?
A main factor for his opinion at the time was his distrust of Western intelligence. However, it should be noted, Hasan wasn't the only person who didn't think the invasion was going to happen. For most people, it was unbelievable that Russia would engage in a land invasion of Ukraine. You want to know who else thought that? Ukraine. Was his statement at the time a mistake and not very responsible? Absolutely. And guess what? Hasan would say as much the next day after the invasion, admitting that there is indeed an invasion going on and that he was wrong. He would continue to say he was wrong many months later. Hasan has also done some charity streams for Ukraine. It's cute, I guess. He would make sure to do quite a bit of coverage on the war. Well, of course, until the other thing happened. Overall, he seems very supportive of Ukraine. One of the things you could criticize him for is his reluctance to fund Ukraine if it meant funding Israel. Nowadays, he does near daily coverage of Palestine. Hasan has a very strong support for Palestine, almost to a fault. Hasan publicly supports terrorist groups that have it as their main goal, the annihilation of the Jewish people. Now, Hasan most likely doesn't support them because of that, but rather because they are the ones fighting against what Hasan sees to be a genocide. Again, we have big words being thrown out from Hasan, like genocide and fascism, but Hasan dedicates himself to covering this topic every day. And every day he covers things that make Palestine look good and Israel look bad, and sometimes inviting a few questionable people to his stream. In any case, Hasan has a very strong opinion on Palestine. Some of the time this strong opinion invites some unsavory audience members. Hating Israel and the Israel government can get disguised as hating Jews in some cases. However, trying to hide behind that to stop all criticism is equally quite stupid. Hasan, like many other political streamers, would get into debates with other people about them. For one debate, he would be on Piers Morgan. On another, it would be one he had with Asmongold. In all honesty, it was more of a conversation than a debate, the consequences of which, but most likely his previous comment that day, would get him temporarily banned from Twitch. Asmongold is a content creator that does a mix of gaming-related drama, and real-life politics. When related to the two wars, Asmon actually has an opinion that most people get confused with, or believe he's flip-flopping on. You see, Asmongold is on board with the funding of Ukraine, but he doesn't want to send any money to Israel or Palestine. He takes a stance with Israel that sending money over there is less important than the problems in the US. This talking point is normally used for Ukraine, but whatever. People point out how he can support one war, but not the other. But basically, Ukraine isn't Israel. Asmongold believes that the war in Ukraine is utterly unjustifiable. It's also a main point of his that he wants to stop Russia's imperialist expansion. When it comes to Israel, it can be inferred that he does in fact think that there's a genocide going on there, and that how Israel is handling the war is pretty terrible. Well, it was on his stream that would get him banned that he explained his standing.
These people are not your allies. They are not the same as us. They come from an inferior culture that is horrible. It kills people for their identity, and it is directly antithetical to everything Western values stand for, and it is an inferior culture in all ways.
Using words such as inferior culture and saying he didn't care if a group of people were being genocided didn't really go over well for some reason, and his account would be banned in the coming hours. Overall, he shows modest but wavering support for Ukraine, and doesn't really like either side when it comes to Israel or Palestine. H3, or Hihi, would actually back up Asmongold when it came to his main point of his argument. H3 and Hasan actually used to be much closer before the issue of Israel and Palestine. H3 is actually really emotional when it comes to Palestine.
We can to save it. You should be criticizing Israel's government. You should be criticizing them for this fucking horrific genocide, mass murder of people in Gaza, right? You should be. So here's what I'll say about Israel. Listen. The cabinet is run by genocidal maniacs. They're led by Netanyahu, who should resign in disgrace and go to prison for being a war criminal. He's made a coalition of the most radically conservative freaks.
And he seems devastated by what happened over there. So much he would actually donate aid to Palestine. That being said, he's very centrist on the issue. He still understands that a terrorist group runs Palestine, and he's not really okay with that. He has an overwhelming amount of emotional support for the Palestinian people, while not being very keen on some of the things that their government does.
60 people got violently, brutally murdered by terrorists, murdering families, kidnapping children, killing children, desecrating people's bodies. I mean, just the most horrific acts of terror that you can imagine.
He gets very slight support for Palestine. Sadly, it would never be enough for him. And for Ukraine, it's pretty boring. He is as emotional with this as he is with Palestine. He thinks that the fighting is terrible and Ukraine should win, taking back territory in the process. Strong support here.
Baby's okay.
Fellow podcast enjoyer Joe Rogan has his own opinion on the topic. And if you know anything about Joe Rogan, you know that should be interesting.
I think there is a less than zero possibility that we do not go to the moon.
Okay, so basically Joe Rogan is sentimental and emotional when it comes to Ukraine. It's basically a war he thinks should never have happened. He also thinks Russia had no reasonable justification for the war. On the other hand, he still thinks that there are reasons one can point to explain Putin's reasoning. That reason was the aggressive expansion of NATO, including the pushing of chemical weapons to the Russian border. He portrays the conflict as if we are testing the waters to see how far we could go before war. He feels the same with the current support for the conflict, as he thinks we are seeing how many weapons we can send until Russia presses the nuke button. He also doesn't like America's monetary support for the war, so yeah, he definitely takes his usual conspiratorial take on the conflict. He gets a very slight support for Ukraine. Spreading pro-Russian propaganda is bad, but I doubt he's doing it on purpose, and it's obvious he wants Ukraine to win. Now when it comes to Palestine and Israel, he seems to take the Palestinian side rather than the Israelis. From his opinion on Ukraine, it can probably be inferred he probably doesn't want us sending any money to Israel. Adding on to that, he seems very empathetic, if not more so with Palestine than he does with Ukraine. It's quite the odd stance to take when he had such a strict one with Ukraine, so he gets some decent support for Palestine. Nothing crazy though. How should I talk about this guy without anyone getting mad at me? I mean, how can I make this entire video without anyone getting mad at me? Hey, if you haven't left a mean comment by this point, you get a free slice of sourdough bread. Anyway, it's time to see if Elon's opinion will help us come to a conclusion on the conflicts. Well, let's start at the beginning of the war. Elon made many efforts to try and help Ukraine when the war started. The most prominent of these was giving them access to Starlink to help better their communication. Elon seemed like he wanted Ukraine to win, and he would help them get there. However, as time went on, Elon became more and more cautious of the war.
Expand lives, it must be for a purpose, and not just, a mile here, a mile there. In fact, a mile back and forth. The lines aren't moving. So just every day, people die. For what purpose? And as you said, there is no way in hell that Putin is going to lose.
Getting really seriously concerned with the reality of a nuclear war. A war he assumed would happen if the West continued to escalate by sending supplies to Ukraine. Yeah, the West was the ones escalating when it was Russia who was the one declaring the war on people. Elon now does not want the US to send any aid to Ukraine. He gets no support for either side. Not only has he joined the mainstream Republican Party opinion on the issue, but he's literally joined the Republican Party, meaning assuming his opinion on Israel and Palestine shouldn't be too hard. And it really isn't, since Elon posts on Twitter like 20 times a day. It's easy to find Elon purposely finding pro-Israel tweets and retweeting them, saying interesting, and something else. Not to say all these posts are misleading, but to only show one side of the argument makes the other side look way worse. Elon has yet to retweet anything that makes Palestine look good at all. He gets some strong support for Israel. If he was more direct with his opinions, it would be higher. Now, I know we've been talking about some interesting Republican-leaning individuals, but now I think it's time for a person who has a more centrist take on the conflict. Someone that isn't radicalized to either side. Yes, of course, Matt Walsh, the centrist.
All of us today would be in a worse spot if slavery never existed at all across the entire globe.
Matt Walsh is basically the pre-World War II isolationist. He doesn't want us to get involved in any foreign war. That includes Ukraine, Israel, and potentially Taiwan. So even with him holding some pretty crazy ideas, he's the most centrist person on this graph, and so that's why he gets literally zero support for anyone. You know what? I think we deserve a real centrist on this graph. Today, we will be interviewing my local aunt. Hello, good sir. What do you think of the war in Ukraine? Yes, I see. And the Israel-Palestine war? Oh, really? I guess I haven't thought of that before. Well, thank you for the info. Now that's how you do a centrist take. I mean, for me, I wanted to ask ChatGPT where it landed on the graph, and it said it would go somewhere around here. Now, if you were looking for some real logical answers, there you go. I mean, how can AI be biased? Hey, get that out of here. I'll talk about that some other time. On February 8th, 2024, Tucker Carlson decided to do an interview with Putin. Tucker had already been fired from his show on Fox the year prior, but in his eyes, he was still a journalist doing journalism. So, Putin would be interviewed. And overall, it was a mess for Tucker. Normally, it's okay to interview whoever you want as long as you make clear to your audience you do not agree with the opinions of the interviewee. In the same way as Hasan, tourist Tucker did a bad job not pushing back hard enough, while also letting him ramble on about things that weren't relevant. Not only were you giving these ideas platform, but you were normalizing them. Though he can be seen constantly saying pro-Russian propaganda, it's also true he believes in the halting of all funding to Ukraine, and doesn't have any love for NATO at all. On the other hand, I don't think I can make him pro-Russian, due to the lack of any obvious pro-Russian sentiment. After the interview, he talked about how annoyed he was with Putin's answers. When concerning the war, he does think that there was some justification, but that Russia was still in the wrong. He will also attack what he sees to be the dumb justification for the war, like the denazification of it.
What do you think of Putin saying the justification for continuing the war is denazification?
I thought it was one of the dumbest things I'd ever heard. I didn't even understand what it meant. Denazification?
So I think it's fair to have him somewhere around center to slight support for Russian, but that's it. Also, he gets some slight support for Palestine. Poor leftist pro-Palestinian people. You have to share your identity with people like Tucker Carlson and Andrew Tate. Now what about the person on the other side of these conversations? For most of the people on this list, they've probably been interviewed by this guy, that being Lex Fridman. Okay, for Lex, it's hard to say where he stands. If you were to look into a dictionary for the definition of centrist, you would probably find this guy. Overall, it's very hard to discern his opinion on the conflicts, since he does very little speaking himself, as he's the one asking the questions, but it's not impossible to find where he stands. There are a few ways to figure it out, like the type of people he interviews, the comments he makes from now and then, and his presence not during the interview.
What was it like going over there and interviewing Zelensky?
A lot of people sort of say that it's trivial that he stayed in Kiev when the Russian military invaded. To me, it's not trivial at all. I think that's a truly heroic act.
Through these means, we can find a few things, like how he thinks the reason for the war in Ukraine was NATO expansion, or how much he sympathizes and goes along with pro-Palestinian talking points.
I think what is happening in Gaza is an atrocity. And I think that the Israeli government is directly responsible for it. And to the degree the US government is assisting the Israeli government in this, which I believe it currently is, it needs to stop immediately.
Overall, it's not very fair to put him too far either way, but if I had to put him somewhere, I would say it's probably about here. A tiny bit of support for Ukraine and a tiny bit for Palestine. Nothing crazy on either side, but a reasonable way to look at what he believes.
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Is that Jordan Peterson? Wow, I feel like I haven't seen this guy since like 2016, about how he would debate college students about how he wouldn't use their pronouns. Well, anyway, let's see where this conservative individual stands on these two wars. I wonder. Well, let's start with the simple one for Jordan. Jordan tends to stand with Israel concerning the war. It's nothing crazy, but he has a much bigger preference over Israel than Palestine. But how can he stand with Israel when there's been so many disagreements on how they're handling the war? Well, this is actually something he predicted. At the start of the war, he claimed that if it went on too long, public opinion on the war would start to flip, which, yeah, definitely seems to have happened. It seems he disagrees with many pro-Palestinian arguments, such as the one Hasan used in his debate with Asmongold about bullying the victim. Jordan seemingly hates the victimhood of the people put on Palestine. So yeah, he gets some, but not a lot of support for Israel. He's not going any further due to the lack of moderate to any extreme public support for Israel. When it comes to Ukraine and Russia, well, it looks like Tim Pool is getting a buddy. Well, not quite to the extent, since Jordan talks way less about the issue than Tim does, and doesn't say so many outright pro-Russian stances. However, it should be noted that Jordan did express many of the same talking points he did. The West caused the war, the US shouldn't care about it, Russia has many reasons to fight, and Ukraine will never win anyways. It's talking points like that, but 2x. On the other hand, it's like a step up from Lex's reasoning of the war, meaning he gets into some dangerous territory. Rhetoric like these things bring him into the pro-Russian territory. Alright, now that we're getting to the end of this thing now, I thought it would be fun to place the countries themselves on the list. Russia likes Russia, Russia hates Ukraine, Russia hates Israel because Palestine hates Israel. Russia likes Palestine because US likes Israel, which hates Palestine. Palestine likes Palestine. Palestine hates Israel. Palestine likes Russia because Russia likes Palestine, also Russians. Israel loves Israel. Israel likes Ukraine because Ukrainians like the US, also Jews. Ukraine likes Ukraine. Ukraine hates Russia. Ukraine likes Israel, even though there's some jealousy going on there. And now I think it's a good point to zoom out and analyze what we got going on here. Oh, also, here are some other interesting people of where they would go on the graph. I just didn't have any time to go over all of them individually. As you can see, there's much more support for Ukraine than Russia, but with Israel and Palestine, it's quite mixed, with many people not even having an opinion one way or the other. If we were to categorize it into 4 sectors, you would have something that looks like this. The pro-Israel, pro-Ukraine sector is a very busy quadrant with a mix of left, right, and independents alike. This is a place for people that happen to agree with America's current outlook on both wars. Then there's the pro-Palestinian, pro-Ukraine sector, another popular sector that is mostly filled with more left-wing individuals. Here we have people that not only just care about aiding our allies, but the more emotional impact as well. Is it right to help these people if they've been doing these bad things? So people here don't just follow everything with the US. They decide if they're worth supporting. Now we've come to the pro-Russia, pro-Israel quadrant, a quite barren place that I bet if I added like 10 times more people, it would be the least crowded by far. To be here, you would have to believe that the war in Ukraine is a just war by Russia, that they should win, but also be pro-Western enough to want Israel to win against Palestine. It's a very awkward position to be in. Now, finally, we have the last quadrant, the pro-Palestinian, pro-Russian sector. This place could be for the people who simply hate the West so much they agree with whatever they see as the fight against the West. Israel and the Western colonization of the Middle East, and Ukraine and the NATO expansion east next to Russia. Some other groups are the true isolationists. These are the people that know that no matter what, do not want the US to go into any war. Yep, it really worked for America in the 1930s, so why not do it again? Then you have the hypocritical isolationists. These guys exclaim that the US should not be involved in any war, and that the money we are giving to Ukraine is way too much. But then they'll turn around and support Israel. Again, hypocrites. Over here is where I think the average person stands. On average, they support the cause for supporting Ukraine, but aren't sure enough about Israel or Palestine to have strong feelings one way or the other. Now, this group is called the Russian paid actors. These are people who hold suspiciously pro-Russian stances, and in one of them, it's not suspicious over if they're paid off or not. Lastly, we have a very liberal group of people. These people are very pro-Ukraine, pro-Palestinian, and they also tend to have very progressive beliefs. They can also tend to use emotional language to get people to their side. What does this information tell us as a whole? Well, it seems that Ukraine thing is basically figured out. Either people support them, or they don't really care about it. Being pro-Russian in the West really isn't a thing. Well, for now. When it comes to Israel and Palestine, well, who really knows at this point? If this graph doesn't actualize that this war is complicated, then I don't know what will. So in conclusion, here's some advice. Maybe don't get all your information from just one person. Seeing how many people have very different viewpoints, it's unlikely that your guy is the correct one, and everyone else is wrong. So try to get informed by multiple viewpoints, even if it's ones you disagree with. I think it's also important to note that not everyone here is placed accurately. I feel like it's fair to say that they could easily be moved a little bit here and there. However, I really don't think anyone on here is dramatically off. But if you feel like I'm wrong on any of them, then I'm open to criticism. There were a few people I wanted to add, but let's say in the case of Logan Paul, for instance, there's no apparent influence to either side. Well, other than that one hand comment that one time. Though, funny enough, Logan's brother, Jake, isn't too hard to figure out. Oh, he goes over here, by the way. Another person I didn't add was myself. I'm sure that a few people could easily figure it out if they paid close enough attention to where I would probably go. I tried to make my writing more centered, but come on, everyone has a bias. But you know, if I were to place myself on here, I would say I land right here. Also, I'm so sorry it came out so late. I'm sorry. I'll never do it again. Please forgive me, please. I'm sorry. Next video is happening real soon, guys, I promise.